We gotta get
Listen,
going.
where you playing in town? You playing here?
We're doing the Normo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
big
big place,
sold
that
it out.
side of town. That's a
Very
big
nice.
place. You sold
What's
it
that,
out.
20,000 seats?
We really should.
Trying not to fall in the same old trap. I left without a map, the same old place I'm going to. Fine, smiling into that same old plan. We're doing what I can to make it a little different this time.
The hell are you doing?
I couldn't sleep. I'm checking the ropes. There was a frayed end on your rope, and I'm cutting it out. Good weather, bad weather. No, later, anytime's good for climbing.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. What time you're listening to this, I don't know. This is Chris Kalous, and you've found the Normal Cast. Thanks for listening. It is January 31st, 2012. On today's show, I sit down with my friend and friend of the show, BJ Sbarra. BJ runs a site called Splitterchoss, and it's become one of the longest-running climbing blogs out there, recently noted in Outside Magazine as one of the top 10 climbing blogs. And we get into it about the internet, about climbing on the internet, about media in general, and how sustainable these kind of homegrown, do-it-yourself internet projects really are. So this is the fourth episode of the Normal Cast, and I am still getting this thing sorted out and trying to figure out, some set pieces that we're going to do, some set intros, stuff like that. I haven't really launched this to the greater world. Most of you guys that have found it sort of by accident, or you were at the old podcast, or you're friends of mine. So I appreciate you guys listening. You can think of the Normal Cast as that really cool band that you guys were the first to discover. You were the first ones in the crowd. You were the first ones to buy the albums. You were the first ones to really give a shit about this. And that's going to feel important later on once I sell out. But I'm just trying to get this thing worked out. That's one of the subjects of our talk today with BJ, is that these do-it-yourself internet things, they're done creatively in our own time, and I'm trying just not to feel any pressure to do anything particular with this thing. Just create some online content that people enjoy. So I'm glad you're listening. We're going to get this thing a little tighter with each show, and I hope you stick around. Please tell your friends. Let's get some folks involved by emailing me or writing some comments on the website. Again, my email is chris@enormalcast.com. So send me an email. I'm hopefully going to start doing some listener emails because I've gotten a couple that are pretty funny that I haven't dealt with yet. So, all right, let's check out this interview or this chat with BJ Sbarra. I'm sitting in the kitchen here with a friend of the show and longtime friend of mine, BJ Sbarra, and his dog.
There's Thunderpup.
Thunderpup.
Saying hello.
Who's a little, what kind of dog is that?
She's a schnauzer.
A schnauzer. You don't see a lot of schnauzers as crag dogs.
Not too many, yeah.
But this is the second in an illustrious line, actually. Hopefully an illustrious line. Yeah. But we won't go into the tragedy of Nickel Pup yet again.
Yeah.
That's been
already
done
had some
before.
coverage on air.
Yeah. I'm sitting with BJ, and I wanted to sit down with him because he is a purveyor of online climbing media. He has a website called Splitterchoss.
That's right. We're at Splitterchoss World Headquarters right now.
Yeah, totally, in Carbondale.
The kitchen.
Yeah, Carbondale is actually, between the Normal Cast and this and Rock and Ice, I mean, this is like a mecca.
It's kind of a media hotspot.
Yeah, totally. We all hate each other for the most part, too. We're all rivals.
Or we all have nothing better to do than start online media.
But I wanted to sit down with BJ, not just to promote his site, although that's a nice thing because he's been really helpful to me over the last year with setting this up and getting my presence online. But I also wanted to talk to him just about the idea of online media in general, which is a huge debate in society, I think, right now, because it's mostly seen as a free resource, and everybody's been trying to figure out a way to make money off of it, not just climbers, but all the way up to the big newspapers and what else. Anybody who's listened to the news or paid attention has heard about this. But also specifically what his motivation was behind Splitterchoss, and I can get a chance to talk about my motivation behind this, because although BJ is getting compensated at this point. There was how many years probably of
Most of them.
Yeah, of just doing it as something.
4
that you do for
years,
interest, so.
probably. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us about that. What your website does, when you started it, what you were thinking when you decided you wanted to do it, and that kind of thing.
Well, it's really evolved. I mean, now, the folks at Outside Magazine graciously listed it in their top 10 climbing blogs recently, and I thought their description was pretty apt. They mentioned it's, basically about the climbing lifestyle. And I think that, they almost summed it up, I think, better than I could have before that, it was put that way. It really is. It's not about, how hard people are climbing or necessarily the latest breaking news. But it's just, hey, we're climbers. We're out climbing all the time. This is the climbing lifestyle. And so, it's at the point now where a lot of the content will just come from conversations we have at the cliff. We'll be out climbing for the weekend and something will come up. Oh, hey, what do you think about this? And then there's a lively discussion that ensues. And then, that's the week's post or whatever. And you originally started it, you said, to post the routes that you were doing here in the valley. Yeah, I mean, so I was working at Climbing Magazine, the other media outlet that used to be in Carbondale. And yeah, so it started for a couple reasons. One, there was a lot of ice climbing in the Redstone area that wasn't well documented. The guidebook maybe had 12 routes in it, and there's more like 75 or so. And so it kind of started as an effort to just sort of keep tabs on that stuff. And we didn't really know names or anything, but, just wanted to share that information with people. And then also, when I was at climbing, we'd started bolting a lot of the local chaws, just getting some local crags going. And so a part of it was wanting to get the information out to people about that. It's like, hey, here's this cliff. It's, 15 minutes from town. You should check it out. So very much started as a very locally oriented thing. Yeah, and Mountain Project didn't exist, or those sorts of wiki kind of things. Yeah, it was around, but a lot of this stuff was more relevant to locals. It wasn't like, oh, you're from Boulder and you're going to go check out the Narrows, on your weekend. Right. But if you live close to Carbondale and it's July and you want to go climbing after work, you'll go up there. So... it was just, and for me, it was kind of my first forays into the whole web world. I'd gotten involved with the website at climbing, and this was kind of like the pet project, learn how to code things, learn all that world. And then it coincided basically right at that time. I set it up, I want to say fall of 2005, and then like that winter of 2006, I left climbing and went to work for a web marketing company. So it was kind of just the start of this learning curve for all the online stuff. And so, so you're doing it for yourself at that point. It wasn't really had anything to do with Climbing Magazine. No. And then built and grew. Yeah, and it just it just kind of took off. And at first it was kind of like you'd get the cool emails like, oh man, I went and checked out this route. It was really cool. Thanks for putting that info up. Like so many things that people had no idea were. Even stuff that was close to the road, people just didn't know about. And then it, so it naturally kind of evolved because I would update things regularly. So then it was like more into like a blog format. I think at some point it switched to like the WordPress platform and was actually more of like a proper blog, and then so then it was talking about like trips we were going on and things like that. But it reached a point probably like 3 years ago where I realized that wasn't very sustainable, because if you're not going on trips, then you don't really have much to talk about. Right. And how exciting is it to read, oh, this guy went to Indian Creek Rifle or the Black Canyon again, Yeah, well, that's a problem I've been having too. You know how that goes. And while that stuff is fun for us, those of us that are doing it, the greater climbing world at large, I can't imagine it's that interesting to read about that stuff over and over and over. Yeah, I always thought I should have been doing this 15 years ago when I was actually on the road all the time. Yeah, exactly. But it didn't exist. And in fact, the internet didn't exist, which is freaking hard to believe. But I can't imagine how you went to Europe or on these climbing trips and you couldn't be updating your Facebook page all the time and whatnot. We have to send postcards. It sounds so archaic. Well, and you just disappear you'd literally like say goodbye to everybody and it would be months before anybody heard from you. Yeah. And except for a postcard or maybe a phone call that you tried to get to your parents or something. But yeah, this constant connection thing is brand new. So, but you're turning it into a blog and it's interesting, I think, because, and this sounds sort of cliche, but you really were like cutting edge with this thing because you're starting it before the word blog was something you heard every 5 minutes. And yeah, it was certainly something that was mainstream outside the outdoor industry, but it's always been an area that's lagged behind kind of what everybody else is doing. So certainly when it started up, there wasn't a whole lot of other things going on in the space.
Well, yeah, it's like me having to more than explain what my podcast does. I got to start by telling people what a podcast is.
It's a little ridiculous that in the year 2012 you have to explain what a podcast is to marketing people,
climbers and stuff,
at companies. But whatever. Yeah, so and it was just getting it going, and then like 3 years ago, it was like realized that that model wasn't that sustainable. So tried to make it more of an online magazine. And having experience at climbing, realizing, hey, I could come up with this thing where it's got some regular features every month. There's a featured crag or, whatever. And just to give it some regular content. So then for me, too, to have to think about, okay, what am I going to write about this month? To have these sort of base ideas that then could be reused every month.
Right.
So here's an interview with so-and-so, and here's this, and here's that. And so that way, yeah, again, if there aren't trips going on, or there isn't any groundbreaking news, or there isn't some controversy that we can dissect or whatever, that, there's still things to talk about.
Right. And that's really the key is content always being updated, right?
Yeah, just it's amazing how if you're putting out regular content, even just twice a week, you'll look at your stats and people are coming regularly.
Sure.
Versus if you just let it lag even a couple of weeks, you'll see it drop off because they start to realize that nothing fresh is happening. They're not going to check in as often. So there's a big component there of that of having to stay on top of it, and the big thing that I think. We talked a little bit about how people get into this game and then they don't stay with it.
Right.
And it's a hard part because like I've seen a lot of people where they start up and they're like posting 5 days a week. Mm-hmm. And I see that and I'm like, oh, well, good luck with that. I wish you the best. But knowing the realities of, if you've probably got a full-time job or whatever, that is going to be a very hard thing to do. And there's always a lot of psych the first 3 months. And then the reality of putting that content out every day. I mean, it hits you hard. And it's like, I'm at the point now where I try and do twice a week. And some weeks that's challenging.
Yeah.
And you would think like, oh, how hard could it be? But you have a life, it's like, yeah, if you're just sitting around in your pajamas all day, thinking about stuff to write, sure, you could do this stuff. But, the reality is there's things to do and trying to fit it all in. So along those lines, I think, I was at the Outdoor Retailer show in Salt Lake last week, and I was talking to a friend there about how a bunch of sites kind of started around then, and there's only a couple that are still around now. Like the Dirtbag Diaries was like around that time frame, and Climbing Narc. It really takes a passion for what you're doing. Like you really have to be into it because if it's just this recreational thing, it'll just disappear. Like Pimpin' and Crimpin' was a really good example of that.
Yeah.
Those guys had a really funny thing going on.
Sure.
And then they all got jobs.
Yeah.
And it all disappeared.
Sure. And I mean, even with the podcast thing, it's like when I kind of started thinking about it, everybody was right away when I bring it up, they say, well, what about Pod Climber? Isn't that out there? And, there's a few things being updated over there, but that one waned as well. And
right. And I remember when those guys used to be rocking around the trade show doing interviews and whatnot, and they had some good enthusiasm, and then who knows what happens.
Well, I feel the burden of that, because when I restarted this a couple months ago, and I am looking out like, well, what am I going to be doing in 2 years from now? Like, not necessarily what am I going to be doing with the podcast, but what am I going to be doing with my life? I mean, who knows? Maybe I'll have a kid or something like that, and then not only is there not time to do the podcast, but then how involved am I in the community still to be able to come up with content? I feel that burden, absolutely. And I'm hoping that I can sustain it long enough to build it into something that could even be passed on to somebody or whatever, but who knows? I'm just sort of doing my best with what I think I can get done. And that's, right now, even as fledgling as it is, my only criticism I've heard from people so far is they want more. They want more.
Right.
I'm trying to do 2 a month, and I do want to up that. And with the old podcast, it was more than that. But I'm trying. I will get that hopefully going a little further. But 2 a month even is definitely something that I'm having trouble already keeping up with. Not really trouble keeping up with it, but it's a time commitment, and talking other people into getting on the mic is
and this isn't writing an article is a relatively simple thing. I mean, you write it up, and I try to edit things, and so they sound pretty good, and good grammar and whatnot, but you've got to record and edit, and so it's a lot more involved. So it's again to even like twice a month for me. I'm like, wow, twice a month, like that would be, I think that would be a sustainable thing. More than that, that's where it gets to be. You're really going to have the time to put into it. And it's not a discredit to any of these sites that have come and gone. It's just hard. It's a bummer because it's fun to have more of this online community. It's a fun thing to be involved with. The OR show is kind of a great example of that. I met a guy this show who I'd never met before. He has this website called semirad.com. And, we'd interacted online, and it's kind of weird how you can kind of have these relationships online and sort of get to know people without ever having met them. And then we finally got to hang out, and it was super fun, and had a lot of laughs and whatnot. So there is this cool aspect of it too, where you'll be part of this community, right? And it's it's a very supportive community because people realize, generally, if they've been in it for any amount of time, that you are doing something that you're passionate about. So you're bringing some creative energy to it, and so there's a sort of this shared sense of like, oh, cool, you're doing this thing, and you're about that, and I'm doing this thing, and I'm about this, and hey, maybe there's some ways we can work together and help promote each other or whatever. Just hang out and go climbing.
Right? Yeah, and it feels like this little online do-it-yourself thing that happens with the climbing websites. Most of them, that aren't associated directly with a big company or whatnot.
Right.
There is this feeling that we're all in it together. There's not this competitive nature yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Someday,
not
right?
yet.
We'll be
no, you can't send that gear to that guy. That guy doesn't even use his stuff.
Yeah. So, and that's cool. So how long has Splitter Choss, with that name and everything, been online?
Since I think November 2005.
Okay, so we're looking at. Let me do the
so
math
it's in
here.
its
Minus
it's in its seventh year.
Yeah. Okay, 7. Thanks.
Yeah, like 7 this the end of this fall.
And that, in all seriousness, like other than actually, that's like the longest running, probably one of the longest running climbing websites out there, because even companies have done probably multiple full redesigns of theirs like in that time and changed the format and while yours has changed, it's grown more than just you wiped it clean and started over again.
Right. Yeah, always building. There's stuff on there that's super old now at this point. I've got a redesign coming pretty soon, and nothing major, but kind of the big thing about it is to sort of redo the homepage so that there's better access to more of the content that's in there, because now there's so much content in there. There's everything from the gear reviews, which are really popular, to like injury advice, to just kind of everything.
Right.
And right now the format is it's more of just a focus on what the most recent stuff is. Right. And I feel like it's hard for people to get a grasp of how much content is really sitting in there. And, so that's the thing. Yeah, where you're like, okay, I'm sitting on 5 years of content. I should really try and make sure people are getting in there. There's some funny stuff in there.
Sure.
So,
yeah, some really funny stuff.
Yeah, like that aid climbing rant guy. I think he's in there somewhere.
So, you do have some advertisers now. Who's like your guys on there?
So right now, Black Diamond, Outdoor Research, and then La Sportiva. They've all done stuff, and, they're all kind of on board, and that's been great. And then, at the last show, talked to a few new potential folks, and it's great to see, people are getting more psyched on it and realizing that it's a niche thing, but it's a pretty core audience, and that it's a good place to be. And I think, it's like we've been around for a while now. Right. So, the other thing that has really happened in the last couple of years, especially at a place like OR, you see it where, anybody and everybody is starting a blog and then trying to get some free gear.
Right.
And so companies have really become wary of this, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm so-and-so from whatever review.com, and I'd love to see that Patagonia jacket.
Right.
And so the companies themselves are having a harder time separating the noise, filtering through the noise and realizing like what's legit and what's not. So, something like this that's been around a long time, it's like starting to build up some pretty good cred, and realizing like, hey, we're not just going, we're not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I said, 7 years is that's
it's weird to think about it like that.
Well, that's a serious chunk of the life of the internet. The internet, and I remember going back to college in 1997, and they gave, I signed up and they gave me an email address, and I was like, oh, whatever that is, it was around, but it was certainly not the billions of pages that are on now. And it's been around in a short enough period that, old people like me can remember its non-existence, but it's so pervasive in our lives. It's hard to imagine, but it wasn't there even 15 years ago,
Oh yeah, now I go like 2 days without being connected and I like tweak out.
Yeah,
like it's
fully.
such a weird
We all
thing.
know that.
Like you go to Indian Creek and sorry, we're going to Indian Creek again, but you go down there and it's like barely can get cell phone reception in some places, and it's weird just being disconnected. You remove yourself from it for 2 days and you feel like you're missing a part of your life. You can't check your Facebook, you can't check your email. You feel like, oh, what if all these things are happening? And I don't know. I guess since I work in the web marketing sphere, it's maybe a little more. It's a little worse for me too because I'm just used to living and breathing in that environment, and I don't like that aspect of it. But it is what it is.
Well, I mean, honestly, like it's everybody now.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody is. In the morning, there's a couple spots down in Indian Creek where you can get a cell, and every morning there's people stacked up there like waving their phones in the air.
Right? Yeah. The guy wandering.
Yeah.
If you see that guy wandering out in the field 50 yards from the Bridger Jack toilet, that's what he's doing.
Yeah, he's out there looking for that.
He's not
cell.
tripping out on something.
Yeah. So you're you start to make a little bit of money,
and that helps your motivation.
Sure.
And because it's nice too. You start to see traffic grow and whatnot, but like it's hard because. You'll write something, and usually if it's something that people like, you won't necessarily know that because people usually don't comment on things that they like.
Right.
They usually comment on things they hate.
Yeah.
And so you're like, okay, my analytics program says that this many hundreds of people saw this thing. I guess they must have liked it,
right.
Because nobody said anything. So when you catch the eye of an advertiser or like this Outside Magazine thing or whatever, like any recognition is nice, because then you realize people are paying attention. Or when anyone comments. So all of you out there in internet land, leave comments. We love comments.
Yeah.
Comment on the Enormocast page. Tell Chris how much you like the podcast.
Yeah,
and it helps, especially when you're getting something off the ground, just to know that you're not just, in your case, just speaking into the ether out there and hoping that people are listening. To have that positive feedback is a big thing. And I think, again, like for me when I was first starting, when I would run into people that were like, hey, thanks for that topo to that new area. Like I checked it out and it was super fun or whatever. That was a very encouraging thing. And you're like, okay, yeah, people are benefiting from this. Because ultimately, like this is a creative thing that we do, but just like bolting roots, like I'm not doing this for myself.
Right.
I get something out of that, but ultimately someone else needs to be getting something out of it, or I'm just wasting my time.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you feel the same way.
Well, yeah, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this online or on the podcast is sort of to make people aware of those issues of this is relatively free content. I mean, it's free content.
Yeah.
It's not relatively free content. It is free content. And again, going back to the sort of the global issue of the internet of, all this stuff being out there that you can just pick and choose, I've tried the donation thing, which I'll probably do in the future again. Right now, I've sort of backed off of that, much as I appreciated the donations I've gotten, just because I feel like I'm building this and I don't want to sort of sell something that's not going to be there again, or it's going to change in a way that you're not happy with until I'm set on it. One way people can help us out, as simple as that, is putting comments, reviewing this on the iTunes site helps me.
Totally.
Because when you put comments on the website, that's like new content in terms of the internet is concerned.
Sure.
It helps other people find it.
It's always more appealing too when you go to a site and you see that there's sort of this active community around it. And you realize like people are engaging with this and like they're listening and they've got thoughts that they want to add or share. And so yeah, that's a very it's a helpful thing, motivation wise for sure.
Totally. So you again, back to this making money again. Obviously, you're not.
Rolling in it as you can tell.
You're not
living in my free housing over here.
Yeah, but yeah, you're not like making a living off of this thing. And people who get into it for whatever reason, whether it's as an artistic thing, I feel like that's both of our motivations. A creative thing, not an artistic thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, creative thing. I don't necessarily want to call me blabbering on into a microphone art, but maybe someday.
I've seen worse.
but a creative thing. I've been in the community for so long and talked on this podcast even about having this vast network that. At first, it was a surprising thing even to me. But I just realized I've been just doing it so long, traveling so much, and I tend, just like I'm on the podcast, I tend to be, the guy who will chat with you at the cliff and not sit there glumly staring at you because you're on my route or whatever. And so I've made this huge network of people that, like I said, even surprises me sometimes. I mean, I have a recent incident where a guy came up to me. I couldn't remember him. I remembered his face. And he actually was someone who I'd climbed the scenic cruise with in the Black Canyon like years ago. And I was like, he's like, yeah, you remember that? I was like, yeah, I remember that.
Of course, you,
buddy, pal of mine.
Yeah.
And I figured it out in the end, but it was funny. Initially, I was like, I know that dude from somewhere. And, we did this, 15-pitch route together.
Yeah, minor thing.
It's like, oh, yeah, that's right. But, not to sound like I've climbed everything, but it just stacks up over the years. And so, this was sort of like this idea of being still connected to the climbing community for me. And in a time when I'm not as on the road as I used to be, and I'm not out there to all these different climbing areas, but it feels good to sort of do something to stay connected, and hopefully this is it,
Staying connected, and I think, there's a component, like we were talking about earlier, of using the route development analogy of giving back.
Yeah.
Of taking whatever skills and creativity you have and using that to just kind of further the climbing community at large.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, one of my favorite things that you talk about is the whole crowd thing, and how it's just that whole silly thing of, oh, it's crowded, and well, you probably have friends there, and if you talk to them, then they are your friends.
Mm-hmm.
And once it's all your friends at the cliff, it's a fun time. Mm-hmm. We were out at the local winter Chos Crag the other day, and there was like 20 people out there, but we knew almost every single person out there. And so, yeah, you roll up, you're like, oh my God, there are a lot of cars in this parking lot. And then you get out there, you're like, wow, it's all my friends.
Yeah.
And so why is that any different than if those people you don't know? It's just because you've got more of a camaraderie with the people you know. But again, like, there's no reason why, there should be that attitude. And something that I have always tried to promote on Splitter Chos is this attitude of like, we're super fortunate to be doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
We get to go rock climbing.
Mm-hmm.
Like that alone puts us in terms of people who get to do what they want in just such a top percentage of the world.
Right.
And it's easy to lose sight of that in this country, and in valleys like we live in that are, super privileged in those regards. So for me, I've always felt strongly about just keeping that out there and keeping that vibe of like, yeah, we should all be psyched all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, hey, you rock climb too? Wow, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. And just promoting that, because there's enough cynicism out there.
Mm-hmm.
There's enough, people who want to bag on things, and it's like I don't need to be contributing to that part of it. I want to be out there promoting the positive side of these things.
Right.
Because that's ultimately, it's like we're doing this to have fun. We're not solving any major world problems. And
moving on to a slightly different topic. In recent months, I've been paying a lot more attention how immediate these news sources have become. And how, honestly, they kind of are blowing the paper old school magazines out of the water. And I'll give an example. Climbing Magazine I just got in the mail. That must have come a couple weeks ago because I was gone. But, hey, dog, what's up?
Chill out, Thunderpup.
It might have come a couple weeks ago. But anyway, there's an article, a little write-up about that off-width down in Canyonlands, the Century Crack. This 100-foot off-width.
Months ago we heard about that.
Yeah, I was like, what? Like, yeah, that was online. There was videos of it. There was interviews with those guys, like, all over the place. That was in, like, October or November. It was before I went to Sicily.
It was in the fall.
Yeah. So here they are, like, 4 months later, adding no information. It was all the stuff I'd already heard. There was nothing extra enlightening in there, except for the cover has a cool photo of it.
Right.
But, I didn't see that particular photo online, but I saw a bunch more. So this immediacy thing is, the other media sources, just not catching up with it.
Yeah, and I think, I worked at climbing, and even whenever that was, 5, 6, I guess 7 years ago now, yeah, that was a struggle then. It was like, how do you integrate, print and online? And I think you can do it, because I think magazines have a place. But I don't know. I may be a rarity. Like, I don't have a Kindle. Like, I like to read actual books.
Right.
Like, I don't. I look at a screen all day long. I don't want to look at a screen when I'm in my spare time. So maybe that makes me different. I don't know, in today's world. But I like magazines. I like when they come and you get to thumb through them. But for them, it's like they're gonna have to figure out how to differentiate themselves, and there's a place for each. The magazines can show off high quality photography that you're not necessarily get online.
Yeah.
And high quality writing. That alpinist model. I mean, it's basically like that's where it needs to be, because anything that's news related, you're gonna have heard about it months ago, and especially the way that publishing schedules work. It's 6 weeks, so it's like by then it's old hat. So it's not necessarily a news thing, but hey, is this really? Here's an in-depth look at this thing. I think we talked about that with your trip to Italy. How there might be something coming out on that, later in the year, and how do you balance that? Because it's like people see that there's all these photos and stuff, and they've seen your Facebook and climbing these rad features in Italy, and then they read about it like 6 months later.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, and Thunderpup's fully attacking BJ right now. Yeah.
Next time we're going to your house.
Yeah, well, I offered to
it was too early.
I offered to spike her kibble with some Dramamine, but that would be Peter would come down on us pretty hard. But yeah, with the Sicily thing, it was funny because in the emails with said magazine, they even said it. They said, "Yeah, we'd love to print something if it doesn't blow up on the internet first," was the quote. And I was thinking, like, I can blow it up on the internet within minutes of doing it. Yeah. Like how, and this thing will come out, because it has to come home, it has to be written.
Yeah.
The photos have to be submitted, and they've already got their editorial schedule a couple months out.
Oh, yeah.
So there's no room for it. We'll see it in late spring. Now, not to say that they can't go together, because my first thought was, well, it's been out there on the internet a little bit, and then you do see it, and you were interested in it the first time, so you saw the posts or you saw the few things that were about it. Not that we did anything so special down there to really merit that, but as an example, you see a little bit about something, you hear about it, and then the magazine does provide this really in-depth or maybe an artistic look at it, or maybe a more literary look at it, and better photos. At least the internet planted it in your head, so 4 months later, 5 months later, you get the magazine and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that. I'm going to take a look at it. This is going to be interesting to me.
Right.
But there was this conflict of like, almost like we don't want it out there until we get to put it out there.
Right.
And that's gone.
It's a very old school way of thinking about it, and not realizing the opportunities you have. It's like, well, you got the internet. Like you said, use it as a teaser. Put up a little like mini album on Facebook, and maybe that's just the photos you took with your point and shoot, and then Andy Burr's stuff will be coming down the line, and that'll be top notch.
Sure.
And that's the thing. I don't agree with people who say that print is dead. I think it has a place, but the challenge for these guys is figuring out where it fits into the scheme of things and how to properly leverage it. And I don't think anybody's necessarily doing it well right now. I think they're learning. So it's going to be interesting to see how they put it all together. Because you've got other places that, they're kind of on the, more on the cutting edge, something like just more video based content, sites that are really pushing that. It's kind of an interesting time for that.
Yeah. And I feel for these guys, not necessarily, the editors over there, but you mentioned Andrew's stuff. Photographers have gotten hammered by the internet because people want everything for free. And so, we want to wait and put Andy's photos in a place where he got paid for them.
Right.
And internet sites that are putting up photos, I don't know how it's working right now, if they're paying or if they're not paying. And I mean, I don't think most of them are paying very well if
Probably,
they are.
Yeah, I doubt it.
So, I do feel for them, and I have plenty of photographer friends that basically kind of got sideswiped by this whole thing and don't really have the best model right now to figure out, well, how do I make money off of all this stuff when, if I put it on my website, somebody can just take it.
Right.
And then to stop them, I have to, either be a dick or sue them or whatever, but it becomes this like, it's like someone's just coming into your house and going through your light table files and just taking whatever they want, Yeah,
and people seem to have this sort of pretty entitled attitude too when it comes to content on the internet.
Totally. Use listening.
Yeah, you peoples out there who are downloading illegal movies and whatever else you're doing out there.
I didn't do that last night.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't do that either. Whoever's listening, FBI, whoever you are. Right. That never happens in Carbondale.
No.
Look elsewhere.
Yes.
So it's a tough thing because, I share some sentiments of like, a lot of this idea of open source and this open spread of ideas. But at the same time, true talent, these guys should be recognized and compensated. And so, again, I think they're in a tough place. They're trying to figure out how it all fits in.
Yeah. I mean, he got on a plane. He bought the ticket. It wasn't sent on assignment by National Geographic,
right.
with a stipend and an expense report that he'd put in at the end. So, he does, and those people do have to make their money back with their art and with their, what they're creating. So the internet has definitely become a place where that has sort of gotten a little bit more difficult. And so another thing, which is an ongoing thing in climbing, and actually I just saw a post, some posts by Matt Samet about this on Facebook, about just the constant, and this has been going on since I started climbing, like the constant ragging on climbing media and ragging on the rags, the magazines.
Sure, yeah. They're all ads.
I don't, and everybody's like, I don't buy those things. And then they'll be like, but did you see that thing on page 30? It's like, well, and it is, it's like an early version of internet piracy in that, you didn't want to buy it, but if your buddy had it, you're going to read it cover to cover.
Sure.
And
oh yeah, we heard that all the time, and it was just like, and I was at the magazine at the time when things were going from really great to not so great, and so the ad edit ratios were increasing, so that means more ads were showing up in the books to pay for the content, and I think for a long time people got spoiled because, like, in the 90s when things were cranking everywhere, the magazines were fat. And there was still a lot of ads in those magazines, but there was also a lot of content, and they kind of had a, they could afford that balance. And so then when the magazines started getting smaller and smaller, people started feeling like, oh, there's more ads going on. But then, climbers are kind of spoiled, and like if you ever look at like a surfing magazine or a snowboarding magazine, I mean, those things are nothing but ads. Yeah. And so they were just coming from this standpoint where they were used to having so much more content than ads, and then when really they just started to fall in line with what was more of the norm in the publishing world at large, everybody just, I hate those magazines. Yeah, and it's like, well, somebody doesn't, because people are still buying them, and they're still viable business models. So.
Well, and I always called bullshit because, maybe you don't want to go, plunk down, $6 or $7 for one. I mean, I don't know what they come off the newsstand for. I've just always had subscriptions, so... maybe you don't want to do that, but you do like them. And if you're sitting in your van in Indian Creek and it's snowing outside, you're certainly happy to leaf through Rock and Ice or leaf through Climbing Magazine if it's sitting there.
For sure.
After you're done, looking at your what is it, FHM? What's the one with all the hot chicks?
FHM.
What's the other
Maxim.
one? Yeah, Maxim. When you're done, dealing with your Maxim, if you will, the Climbing Magazine's a cool thing to look through. And I don't care who you are, if you're a climber and you're into climbing and that thing's sitting there, you're going to pick it up and look at it, and enjoy yourself and be inspired sometimes, be mad other times, be bored other times. But every one of those magazines has, everybody flips to the gallery to see what these photos are going to do for you. So,
and I think you hit on a big thing there and it kind of gets back to like what you're trying to do with this thing, what I'm trying to do, what we're all, I think, trying to do is there's a big part of the inspiration aspect. It's like I look at the magazines because I want to be inspired. I want to read about some cool trips. I want to see some really great photos. I want to see some places that I may never go, but maybe some places I will go. And I want to know what's out there. And I think it's like, again, once you kind of remove that cynicism from it, it's like we're all putting these things out there in the hopes that will inspire other people, that other people will get something positive out of it. And who knows how that'll affect them, but hopefully in a way that, makes them smile or laugh or whatever. So
yeah, I mean, the only email I've gotten for the Normal Cast, I've gotten one email. So email me.
Send some emails.
Yeah, Chris.
Let Chris know that you love him.
Chris@anormalcast.com is the email address. But it was a great email. I haven't even dealt with it, so don't worry, dude. I'll get back to you. But
top of the list.
It was really funny. Somehow I want to use it on air, but the first thing he said is the things that everybody always says, like, this is great. I listen to it on the way to work. I listen to it at work. I listen to it, and I'm psyched on it because when I can't be climbing, I've got this thing that gets me psyched up. And, that is a great thing about podcasts, I think, because they are this thing that you don't have to pay total attention to. In other words, you can drive your car. You can be on the train into work if you're in a city somewhere, or you can be on a road trip where video, it demands your attention. And people
Yeah.
have asked me when I started this idea is like, well, what about video content? And, you know, I don't have time to produce it in a way that can match what's being done even by the most basic sort of guy with a camera out there. So
Yeah.
I'm not really going to go there because it's a different media.
Then we'd have to worry about what clothes we were wearing this morning.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
and in terms of like this long format thing, like it would add nothing having a
Yeah,
camera on
there's-
us, other
yeah.
than you could see
Thunderpup.
Thunderpup like freaking out on the floor, spinning around and attacking us
Doing
and
Thunderpup
whatnot,
stuff.
which would be funny for about 3 minutes.
Yeah,
at the
exactly.
most.
We can post a separate video of that if you want. I like the podcast thing because as climbers, we're usually driving places.
Yeah.
And, you know, I found that to be a great thing. It's like I'm going to wherever. I'm going to Salt Lake City for the trade show. It's like I got a 6-hour drive, you know. Great.
6 hours of Calouse.
Yeah,
Awesome.
exactly. I get out of the car and I'm just tweaking.
Yeah.
But, you know, I like that. And, you know, also getting back to that free content. I mean, that's basically what we're doing is we're offering free content.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's like, don't worry, we're not making the decision difficult. All you got to do is show up and listen
Yeah.
or read or just check it out. In that sense, we have a leg up on some of the more traditional media outlets because we can pretty much do whatever we want.
I listen to podcasts all day while I'm painting because that's what I do for my normal job. A lot of times I'm painting houses, and when I'm alone, I can listen to podcasts, and it's the same thing. It makes the day just zoom on by. And so I did this for a couple of years, and so I've watched the podcast thing sort of grow. And one of my patron saints of podcasting is this podcast called What the Fuck with Mark Maron. And I don't need to promote it because he's in the hundreds of thousands of downloads. But I listened to him from the beginning, and he started it as this comedian whose career was kind of had stalled out. He'd been a comedian for 25 years, and he actually talked about this in the beginning, like, you know, sort of this lament of how he's now in his garage doing a podcast. He doesn't even really know what a podcast is, and now 2 years later, or 2.5 years later, I mean, he's been in New York Magazine, he's been, you know, in Rolling Stone, and he's getting, you know, he's creeping up on This American Life, which is the juggernaut of podcasts. In terms of popularity, you know, he's in the top 10 on iTunes frequently. It's as high as 4 or 5.
Wow.
And one of the things he explained was that, you know, he'd been in this industry where he'd been getting shut down. He'd had to deal with, you know, corporations and Comedy Central and all these different channels where, you know, a project would get so close and then just get shut down and all that sort of thing. And now he was able to just do whatever he wanted. And he could come out there and rant, and if people liked it, he could stop, or, you know, he could say fuck, he could do whatever he wanted to. And it's just this awesome, like, underground free media outlet that, you know, I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
Depending on what I feel like in terms of my popularity and if I want to alienate people or whatever. I mean, I don't, but occasionally I'm going to because I'm that person. Right. So, you know, and it's really fun to think that there's no FCC. You can't broadcast out into the world on radio. It's impossible. You know, everybody owns everything. And this is something you can put out there like whatever. You know, I could say whatever I want.
Yeah.
So
and I think generally people will respond more to that than they will the sort of the canned, edited, you know, dumbed down version of whatever some corporate executive signed off on.
Yeah, and it's so important to me as I kind of got this new podcast going is this idea of authenticity, and because in all the podcasts I listen to, I can just tell the difference. You know, I also have been listening to the Freakonomics podcast, which is you know, guys that wrote those books that are super famous, but it's so like slick and well produced, and it's so clearly coming from some sort of entity that has this motive, this sort of profit motive or whatever else.
Sure.
I don't even like it as much as some of the ones where it's just a guy that presses play or presses record and starts going on, because the authenticity thing is really important to me. And going forth in the future, that's kind of my pledge with this. And I'm not sure how far I can sustain it. Yeah, and one of the issues is that I don't have a studio. Yeah. And normally you don't let dogs in the studio. So anyway.
8-month-old dogs.
Yeah, so... But going forward, I mean, that's sort of my pledge. It's like, let's keep authenticity thing. The part of it that everybody will have to understand is that, I'm sitting in somebody's kitchen. There's this dog freaking out. And also some of the shows are going to suck, and I may not hit the mark. And where if you've got a group of producers that are calling the shots, you know, and it's their professional producers that are making a salary off of it. You know, they're going to make sure that every single one has this certain level and whatever else. And so I guess my pledge is with the authenticity, those of you listening have to sort of, you know, give us a break. Like, some of them are going to suck. I mean, shit, we've been going on for 45 minutes. Half you guys probably tuned out, you know. Right. So of my 16 listeners, hey, everybody. Yeah. You know, 80 y'all, I've already shut it down.
Don't worry. We have things we have to do this morning, so yeah. I got a self-imposed time limit.
Yeah, I got a plumber coming to my house here in a few minutes, so I got to go. But anyway, so that's sort of my thing, too, is this authenticity of what we can do, not only podcast, but what you're doing as well, especially when you started. It was just your thing. Like, you just put on whatever you want, and you still have a lot of flexibility with that.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, and that's what's fun. You know, it keeps it interesting, and you can just decide, oh, I'm gonna take it in this direction now, or like, hey, I want to talk to this person, or I'm gonna try this thing, or run this contest, or whatever. And that's what I think. That's ultimately what will keep you going. Is, you know, if you got stuck in a rut, like anything, you know, if you're stuck in the same job forever and ever and ever, and there's nowhere to get creative or whatever, it can be tough. Yeah. You know, and same kind of thing, you know, this is the creative outlet. And so to be able to just say, like, hey, I'm going to try this thing, or I'm going to try that thing, that's, you know, ultimately what I think will keep it going, you know, and keep it so it's still exciting and still fresh, and you still want to put the time and energy into doing it.
Yeah. And I'll sort of go gently into the good night of getting sponsors and you know, that sort of thing, because I am concerned, and I've seen, you know, media outlets have to cater to what their sponsors want. I mean, I wrote gear reviews for Mountain Gazette for a couple of years, and Mountain Gazette is super independent, or it was anyway. I don't know where it's at now, but even there, you know, it's like I couldn't write bad reviews. I couldn't slam a product. I mean, I basically was, if I didn't like it or had a real problem with it, I just wouldn't print anything. Yeah. It just wouldn't make it in.
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic of discussion.
But you know, there's this thing of like, okay, well, how authentic can it be? So I mean, that's another pledge. Is as I do try to get sponsors or try to get ads and everything else. I mean, I want to be careful about, well, how does it control the content? And one encouraging thing was last episode I had Kelly Cordes on, and he talked about that too, where he'd gotten a deal with Patagonia to write on their Cleanest Line blog. He said he was really upfront with them of like, well, I want to be me and my voice, which is crass and sometimes confrontational. And, you know, he understands. I mean, I'm not going to draw this like monster line in the sand that, you know, I want to say, you know, horrible, awful things and I don't want anyone to stop me. But he understood there's a line, but he also wanted them to know that he's going to push that line. And so far he said, you know, they've basically not edited him whatsoever. And, you know, he's been able to do whatever he wanted because he's responsible and he understands that, okay, there is some limit.
Yeah, and in the end, I think that comes back in a positive way to them because people realize that. You know, they got the picture of him up there with his funky hair, and you know, he had a thing on Facebook the other day joking about how he thought they would have at least photoshopped out the mustache or whatever, the molestache as he called it. Yeah. And, you know, but I think that speaks positively to them that they're like, no, this is who this guy is. And we're backing that. And so you see that and you realize, okay, they are being authentic with that. You know, they're not being like, hey, Kelly, that's great, but can you please tone it down? Or can you write about this and not that? Or can you get a haircut or whatever? And so that's, you know, again, I think that, you know, it looks good on them. So,
well, and I think we're still in this era with climbing. I mean, despite the fact that we've all who've been in it for the last decade have watched it grow in the mainstream, and a lot of these bigger corporations want to, you know, do this sort of mainstream thing. You know, we're still small enough, and, you know, climbers still have this amazing bullshit meter. You know, they can smell it, and they know when this is just somebody shilling for the big company, or when it's just somebody who's talking. And, you know, finding that line, I think, has been a burden, you know, of the magazines since they began, of how, you know, do we keep this really cranky people who are ready to call bullshit on whatever happens, people in line, and keep them interested and keep them involved. You know, it is a tricky line.
Oh, I think Thunderpup's had enough.
Yeah, Thunderpup has had enough. All right, well, let's wrap this up. Hey, come here. Is there anything else you wanted to put in here? It's splitterchoss.com.
Splitterchoss.com, yeah. Just looking to do some new stuff this year with some contests and things, so head on over and like we said, leave comments, send emails, let us know how much you like these things.
Or don't like them.
Or don't like them. That's fine, too. I had a guy who used to harass me. That's a whole nother story. But, man, thankfully I figured out what his real name was, and he kind of disappeared from the scene. But it was almost guaranteed if I posted about ice climbing, this guy would be on there just ranting and raving. And
I know who that was. Do you want to try to sell your Subaru?
Yeah, and if anybody wants a Subaru Outback that needs a ton of work, we'll give it to you cheap.
What kind of work?
Some head gasket work and maybe a new catalytic converter.
Okay.
So, yeah, anybody who wants a project, climbers like projects.
Post something on Splitter Shop.
That's right,
we'll get back to you.
It's been well loved.
And as for the Enormocast, we are at enormocast.com. Send me an email at chris@enormocast.com. You can also like us on Facebook, the Enormocast, and mainly, if you pick this up off the page, go to iTunes, subscribe, and leave a review, please. All right, BJ, thanks for hanging out.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
And thanks, Thunderpup, wherever you are.
Thunderpup would love to come back anytime.
Yeah, right. My new co-host. Right on.
I told my pap and mam I was coming to the mountains to trap and be a mountain man. Acted like they was gut shot. Says, son, make your life go here. Here's where the people's is. Them mountains is for animals and savages. I said, Mother Dew, the Rocky Mountains is the marrow of the world. By God, I was right.